mama, come in, grab a drink. I hope you're doing well. What a week. Oh my gosh. So we've been sick as a dog in this house, and it's been probably one of the most difficult weeks I've had in a very, very long time because we were all sick at the same time, myself included. And tell me why it is that when you are a mum, that's probably the last time, at least for a very long time, that when you're sick, you actually get to rest. Like, not only was I sick and probably needing to lie down and sleep a lot of the time, but I was looking after my kids, feeding, cleaning, cooking, and it just felt like it made it linger on for so much longer. Obviously, I need to do that. I'm their mum. I need to look after my children. But it's just this vicious cycle because the less rest you get, the longer it takes to deal with this virus. My God, it's just, I don't know, it's winter is around the corner in Sydney, and I feel like the lurgies are coming thick and fast. And I'm dreading the winter that was maybe 2 years ago, where in my family, we were sick probably for 8 to 10 weeks back to back. Anyway, I hope you've been well. If you're watching this on YouTube, you will notice that I have a slightly different background. I'm trying a few things out, testing out the waters. So let me know. And if you're listening to this online, just a reminder that these clips are also on YouTube. You can go into YouTube and find me at Lorena Van Des, and you will find not only my podcasts, but you will also find a heap of vlogs which I film on a weekly basis. And my vlogs are very much just real mum life online, trying to drown out the highlight reels that exist in this world. The topic for today's podcast, I wanted to talk to you a little bit about the perceived timeline that we have as women. I guess what inspired this conversation today was that I'm approaching 40, which sounds scary and exciting at the same time. I remember so vividly when I turned 30 that I feel like I woke up and I just felt like this magical feeling of, wow, 30 is incredible. It felt like opportunity mixed with like just leveling up. It just felt like Lorena 2.0. Part of me hopes that that's what happens when I turn 40. A part of me also feels like 40 is starting to sound like the other side. And that sounds really drastic. And I'm sorry if you're listening to this and you're already in your 40s. But the reason I say this is specifically because of this timeline that we have as women. And 40 is at the tipping point of that timeline. And why I'm saying that is because the timeline is entirely based on our fertility. It's well known that when a woman approaches 40, the conversations start, about like, can she still have children? 40 is a little bit symbolic of, there's been a few people on the other side of 40 that have been lucky to have kids, but it really is kind of that the body clock is well and truly ticking by now. And so I feel like, although that's not a concern for me, I have 2 kids. I've kind of gone through that journey myself, and I know I put the question out there a few weeks ago whether or not I'd consider a third, but I feel like at my stage and in my situation, a third would be a bonus. If I was to be going down that path, it's not like I'm in desperate need for a child. I've got my children. So turning 40 doesn't mean that anything's closing for me. However, it still has this sense of like I'm at the end of something, and I wanted to explore that more today because I really feel like as women we have this perceived expiry date, and it's not even really perceived. We haven't done this to ourselves, honestly. Society has given us an expiry date, and after fertility is at its peak, we start to really feel like our good years are behind us and all that kind of stuff. And I'm a bit sick of that concept, to be honest, because so many of my idols are so much older than me, and there is so much more to life than the timeline that has been presented to us our whole lives, which is entirely focused on our fertility. If you're anything like me and you grew up around the same time that I did, we all know what I'm referring to when I'm talking about this timeline, right? It's kind of like the traditional order of how things are done. By certain stages in life, you will have achieved certain things. For example, you will have a very good idea of what you want to do professionally by a certain age, probably in your 20s. Marriage is something that you'd probably aim to have happened in your late 20s, early 30s, and then babies soon after. I'm just presenting a random timeline because I think for all of us, it looks slightly different, and obviously it depends on our preferences, but the fact that there is this timeline, that there are 3 solid pillars in this timeline, which is career, marriage, and babies. And I've been thinking about it a lot lately because I feel like that is something that men don't really question in terms of a timeline in general. I'm obviously speaking in general, but men have this never-ending journey where somewhere along the line they'll work out their career, somewhere along the line they'll map out some kind of relationship, and somewhere along the line they'll consider children, whether it's one or a few, and it just doesn't seem like it has that same rigid pressure to work things out. I always felt like I wanted to be a young mum, and by young I'm referring to mid-ish 20s. And I honestly think that was entirely based on the fact that my mum had me at 26. By the time she was 30, she already had 2 kids. Then she had a third, a few years later. And in my mind, that time frame kind of meant that you'd be young enough to be a young mum, to have energy, to be with your kids, to be fully present, and also do other things when you were older. For example, travel, build a career, build enough wealth. I don't know how I tied those two things together, but I almost felt like, if you had these experiences young enough, you'd have the opportunity after to continue to grow. I think we see that obviously with a lot of people in the boomer generation, where mostly, more often than not, the women had the kids in like the mid-20s. And then we see these people who are really financially a lot better off than millennials, for example. So I think part of that convinced me that this timeline sort of made sense. Had someone said to me when I was in my early 20s, you will not be having your first child until you're 33, I can't tell you if I would have been devastated or probably done things differently. And I think the latter would have been very helpful, because I think I put a lot on hold, hoping and waiting for those milestones to happen in my life, hoping and waiting for marriage and babies. And I was just very much like, once these things have happened in my life, I've achieved the pinnacle. I always felt that life was supposed to look like marriage relatively young, babies soon after, career will somehow fall into place. There were also other considerations like how close do you have babies? I've always wanted to have more than one, which means you have to be prepared to have, 2 soon after. I did a lot of replicating as well. Like, I'm 2.5 years apart from my sister. My brother came a few years after that. So I was like, if I'm going to have multiples, I better be ready to, kind of bang, bang, bang. We need them to have them close in age. I feel like I was always just naturally conditioned by society to believe in this timeline. And when I noticed that things weren't happening the way that I guess had hoped, like I said, I wanted to have babies in my mid-20s. When those things weren't happening, I started to feel like I was on hold. I don't have too many regrets in my life, but one of the biggest regrets I have is pausing mentally because of the unknown. I was literally in statue mode. Honestly, I felt like I was in statue mode, just over the fact that because I didn't know when things were coming, in terms of getting engaged and then having, getting married and then having babies and all that stuff, I just feel like I didn't maximize my life during that time. And there's nothing I can do about it. I didn't sit there and do nothing. Obviously, I worked, I pursued a path, I studied at uni, I got my degree and all that kind of stuff. So I didn't just not do anything. But had I known then that I'd get married at 31, have my first baby at 33, in hindsight, I still feel like I was too young and too immature to have a first baby. I don't think you can ever be mature enough, to be honest with you. I think you can think that you are. I think you can feel completely ready. But the fact that you've never done it before, the fact that it's the first time it's ever going to happen to you, I think that a new level of maturity has to set in once you've had the baby, because all these ideas that you had about parenting, about being a mother, about, what it is to nurture a baby, almost instantly get debunked the moment you have a child. It's hard to say that, I thought I'd be mature enough, but there is a part of me that still feels like a child. And I know that people say that all the time. I'm 39 this year. No, I'm not. I'm 40 this year. And I still feel about 17. And I am the type of person that, when an opportunity presents itself, I will go out and have a way too good of a time. I still enjoy silly things. I don't feel responsible half the time. Obviously, I take care of my children and I love them like crazy, but there are parts of me that still feel like I did when I was in my early 20s. There are parts of me that still feels like I did when I was in my teens. Had I looked forward then to who I am now and gone, you'll have kids by that age, I would have been like, oh my God, that's so old. How can I be a fun mum? How can I have energy? And now I'm just like, no, that is in no way. So first of all, if you're listening to this and you thought you would have had kids by now and you're still on the journey to having a family, I just want you to know that honestly, when it happens for you, it will feel right. It will feel right. I don't know of a single person who says, I feel like I had my kids too old. I put a question out on my Instagram asking people about their timeline and how they feel about their timeline. And I can't tell you how many different responses I got of people who either had kids really young. I had one mum respond to me saying she was 28 and she had 3 kids by the time she had turned 28. And her timeline felt fantastic, except for the fact that she and her husband knew that it would probably be 10 years before they could travel overseas. And I've had people on the complete other end of the scale who've said, I didn't end up having kids until my 40s. And while I thought that that was going to make me an old mum, while I thought that that was going to mean I wouldn't have enough energy to keep up with my kids, it actually had the opposite effect, because while most of my peers have older kids, I am being kept young by the fact that I have this young baby. So she was spending time with younger mums, and she was, having to catch up with things that younger women, I guess, catch up with. She thought that she was going to feel too old, but actually the reality is that she ended up feeling younger. I feel like this perceived timeline really pushes women to stress about the timeline, and literally not a single person that I've asked, not a single person that responded to my question, and no one that I know in my life ever feels like their life is exactly the way they thought it was going to be, mapped out perfectly, that they're completely on track with this idea that they had. I think the problematic thing is that most of us have felt this stress and this pressure about this timeline that actually brings us no benefit, because firstly, life isn't that linear. Like we imagine life to be linear, but you can't account for things that happen along the way. You might imagine yourself married with babies by a certain age, but that relies on you meeting the right person. That relies on you meeting the right person who also wants to have babies. That relies on things going relatively smoothly for you in terms of, falling pregnant and all those kinds of things. And I think the problem with this timeline is the pressure that it puts on all of those stepping stones that need to happen. And I think a huge problem with that pressure is that it actually makes it harder for us to just live the life that we want to live. Like I said, I always thought I was going to be married and have kids in my mid-20s. And I spent a lot of time wasting opportunities to travel overseas, to do more with friends, to go, explore more places, to study more things. And I feel like that's the one regret that I have, that if I could talk to my younger self and just tell her that, firstly, it's not all in your control. So you can't map it out. You can't have this concrete plan. But also waiting for it to happen is just a waste of time. It's just a waste of time. So maximizing what you're doing with the time that you have and what's within your control is so much better than constantly looking back and checking, where am I along this timeline? Because this timeline is made up. This timeline is a pressure put on women. Honestly, parts of me feel like it's a major distraction, to be honest. It puts us in a box and it makes us go, well, let's just tick these things off. And while we're busy doing that, the rest of the patriarchy can flourish. It holds us back and it doesn't facilitate a good life in any way. The timeline is really problematic, and it's a lie, because it's entirely based on this fertility window, this ticking clock that we all have, that is almost the obsession of a woman's life. Our value is based on our fertility. Our value is based on where we sit on this timeline. And it's like when we get to a certain age, we drop in value, and we've either been successful in achieving the timeline or not. And that's the purpose of our lives. At what point did life stop feeling like something we experience, that we let happen to us? We go through a journey and we're not experts. We're new at life. Every day that we live is a day that we're learning. And that sounds super, super cheesy and super kumbaya. But honestly, you have to remember the fact that having this perceived timeline over something you have no control over something that you've not done before, is literally a distraction from enjoying the fact that life is something to be experienced. Instead, life becomes something that we have to keep up with. It's like, this rolling ball, and we're constantly chasing it. The really interesting thing for me, and I don't know if you can resonate with this, is that one of the big milestones in this timeline is motherhood, right? So for a lot of us, we've hit a certain accomplishment, or we've achieved a certain part of the timeline once we've achieved motherhood. But the ironic thing for me is that once I became a mum, I became so much more aware of the things in life that I didn't do. And that sounds really weird, and it sounds like I'm so ungrateful, and I'm not. Honestly, please don't take it that way. I feel insanely lucky, and that's an understatement, that I get to experience motherhood. I know that there are many people who wish they could and never did or never can. I'm so aware that I'm insanely lucky. But the ironic thing about this whole timeline timeline is that once I accomplished one of the stepping stones or the milestones of this timeline, only then did I look back and go, oh, but what about all the other things I didn't do? And I've got plenty of time ahead to do them. But this is kind of the life crisis I'm feeling, I guess, at the moment, approaching 40. It's like, thank God there are people out there who are achieving incredible things in their 40s, because a few years ago, people would have been like, well, if you haven't worked out what you want to do by 40, then, there's not much left for you to do. You would have never have heard of an entrepreneur at 40, who started a whole business at 40, or someone who started their acting career in their 40s, or, their modeling career in their 40s. Or, like, there's so much opportunity, and it's a really exciting time to be approaching this age. And I feel extremely lucky that I'm approaching this age in this era and maybe not, 20 years ago, because I really do think that there is less and less this sense of redundancy once you become a certain age as a woman. But yeah, I have to say, the thing that really struck out to me was the moment I became a mum, I started to become more aware of the things that I wasn't doing. And partly that might have to do with the fact that up until that point, I was steadily working in a job. I've always loved it. And suddenly I have children. Even that thing that I didn't necessarily do because I was, it was my big passion in life, came to a halt. And then I had a year of parental leave with my daughter, then 2 years of parental leave with my son. And it starts to put this big mark on your kind of track record of accomplishments. And that sounds really horrible. I'm also proud of the things that I've been able to achieve as a mum. There is a part of me that just has this sense of, have I not achieved enough outside of that? And I think a lot of that has to do with this perceived timeline, because there is so much more time to go. Something that I want you to also realize when it comes to this timeline, and if we're having this conversation because you feel like you might be behind, or you might feel like the choices that you made or the timeline that ended up happening for you has put you at a disadvantage somehow, is that the timeline, not only is it false, because this fertility window that seems to guide the whole timeline, I think, is something that we've also been scaremongered with. But I'm not a biologist. I'm not going to fight with biology. I also understand that, yes, of course, at some point as women, we stop being fertile, and there's a whole other world beyond that. But the timeline that we are all made to believe is also something that's quite impossible. This timeline that expects us to build a career, to have a family, to be hands-on mothers and perfectly available, to not have any gaps in our resume, but at the same time not put our children into care. That would make us terrible mothers, but at the same time build a career or work our way up the ladder, because obviously that's what we have fought for such a long time. And I just feel like there is just constantly this internal and social battle with what women should be doing and when. Why are women made to feel like whatever choice they make is the wrong one? If you have babies too young, what, you don't care about having a career? If you focus on your career, what, you don't care about having a family? And I feel like all of this pressure to make good decisions and basically live with the consequences of your decisions as well, and suck it up, princess, because you had to choose one, and whichever one you chose was going to have downsides. I feel like all of this pressure, partly what's causing this child-free by choice movement amongst a lot of younger women. What I find really interesting about this child-free by choice movement is that a lot of the women that are declaring themselves child-free, as in permanently child-free, are so much younger than most of the women my age were when we were still in the process of deciding whether or not we wanted to have kids. In your early 20s, a lot of women have no idea what they want to do. Just like when it comes to, I was still saying, I don't know what I want to be when I grow up, when I was in my early 20s. I'm still saying it now. But my point is, it's like this constant pressure on women, and obviously then seeing how it actually manifests and actually turns into this very challenging reality. I do think that motherhood now is just getting increasingly more and more challenging. For younger women to look at that and just declare themselves child-free by choice is such a hard line, but I can understand where it comes from. Like, it's such a hard line to make that call in your early 20s. Like I said, in my early 20s, I was like, yeah, I'm not sure what I want to do when I grow up. But you're so sure that you don't want to have kids, and good for, like, this is not a criticism by any means. In fact, I actually understand that with so much pressure to meet a timeline, with so much pressure to have a career and have children and to fulfill this life that, is just not possible. It's not possible to do all things and do them perfectly, and yet women get criticized no matter what they choose. I completely understand the throwing hands up in the air, being like, I don't want any part of it. I don't want any part of it, because that is just an unfair existence. Society seems so concerned with the biological clock, so concerned with following what is apparently a natural order for humans. And you can say, obviously, there's a lot of proof that that's natural because, we menstruate so young and we ovulate and da da da. Like I said, I'm not here to argue with biology. I'm talking socially. Society has made so many calls about that, yet the one most natural thing, in my opinion, socially, which is the existence of a village, the existence of that support to new mums and that support, just not just to new mums, collectively, just a collective support socially. When a new baby comes into the world, that there is a collective around that baby. When someone ages and, has increased needs, there is a collective around that person. A village is not just about babies. A village is not just about new mums. It's just about socially how things should work. And what I'm saying is it's so interesting to me that the concern around this timeline because of the biological clock and how things are allegedly supposed to be, society is so invested in that, yet has no problem with the disappearance of the natural way humans would operate. The pressure of this timeline, I think, has also distracted a lot of us from personal growth. In my 20s, I think I had so much anxiety about this unknown timeline, the unknown, future of mine. A lot of anxiety came out of that unnecessarily. And you might say, well, yeah, of course, because in hindsight now, you were going to have babies and all that kind of stuff. But just the pressure that was not necessary. Like, did I even get time to learn about myself, to grow, really grow? I'm not just necessarily talking about goal achievements or personal pursuits in life. I'm just talking about growing as a person enough during that time. Did I maximize that time as a person, or did I just let my anxiety and my obsession with the timeline get in the way? If I had stopped measuring my life against the timeline, there's a good chance that the things that happened, marriage, babies, etc., might still have happened around the same times that they did, but the remainder of my time would have been spent with much less anxiety and much more exploration, discovery, traveling, building relationships, getting to know myself, getting healthy. Like, I feel like there was way too much focus on those really important milestones that I was distracted a lot of the time from just enjoying life. And in hindsight, I wasn't behind at all. Like, this sense that I was falling behind because oh my gosh, I'm almost 30 and, I'm not even engaged and da da da. Like, at the end of the day, there was no behind because, like I said, by the time I ended up having my first baby at 33, I'm 39 now going, is a third baby possible? I'm not behind at all. And I don't feel behind at all. And I guess only I can say if I'm behind, right? And I don't feel behind. So this sense of chasing something that when I actually achieved it was like, oh, actually it worked out quite well at the time that it did. I don't feel like an old mum at 33 having my first baby. Absolutely not. Absolutely not. And I thought that I was going to be. I thought that 33 was old to have your first baby. I wouldn't feel like an old mum if I was having my first baby now, because now that I'm here, I can completely understand that pressure is just a distraction. Honestly, I don't think there's ever really one correct timeline. Our entire value in life is not our fertility. I don't want to get to 40 and feel like, well, I'm just, scraping, I'm holding on to the last little bits of value that I have. Like, that is disturbing to say the least. And I really just think that there's not one correct timeline. I think it's this false idea that women are given and that each person goes on their own journey. And like I said, we should be experiencing life, not chasing it. We should be just experiencing what life brings us and working towards our goals, working towards building an amazing life, meeting people, getting to know the world around us, and not being closed off to things because we already think we know what our life is meant to be about. Now that I'm approaching 40, I'm committed to the next and even better stage of my life. I don't think of my life as a hill that has a peak and it's going to come crashing down after I get to a certain point. Absolutely not. I want to constantly make my younger self proud. I want to constantly make my kids proud and show my kids what's possible as you get older, and continuing to show up for myself, achieve the goals that I never imagined I was capable of because I put myself on hold for so long. I don't know if this resonates with you. I hope it does. I hope it does. If you're listening and you're questioning whether or not you're behind in a timeline. At the end of this episode, what I really want you to do is stop and take a minute to yourself and just think about what I said in terms of experiencing life and not chasing it. If you can really embrace that you cannot control everything that's going to happen in your life. You can chase what you want. You can chase your dreams. You can work on your goals. Of course you can. But it's because they're your dreams and your goals, and not because somebody told you that you better have achieved these things by a certain stage of your life. So mama, it's time for us to just experience life and enjoy the life that we have. Here, take some leftovers. I love you to bits and I cannot wait to see you next time. Bye.